Hello, good morning. I want to tell you about my first ever meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, my first AA meeting. So, it's story time. I went to rehab September 29th, 2009. I went to rehab in Malibu, California, and it was a non-12-step rehab, and there was an optional AA meeting once a week there. And everybody who was in the rehab, except for me, had tried to get sober before, or most of the people, and they had a very negative opinion of AA and they didn't want to go. And they had specifically gone to a non-12-step rehab because they didn't want anything to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I was influenced by them, and I thought, and also I don't think anybody ever wants to go to AA. You know, if you've never been to AA, you don't want to go, right? Like, I think universally nobody wants to end up in Alcoholics Anonymous. Nobody wants to, identify as an alcoholic or have to quit drinking, right? Nobody who has a drinking problem wants to stop. Nobody wants to, it's no destination ever for anyone really is Alcoholics Anonymous. Anyway, so I didn't want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't want to give up drinking. I didn't want any of that either. I'm, just similar, probably like you, right? And so I went to I went to rehab. And then on my last week in rehab, this optional meeting, I think it was on a Tuesday night out in Malibu at the Sober Living House on the water. It was like a really beautiful place. And there was this guy who was famous. He was a musician. I knew his music. He was a hip hop artist. And he came to a rehab that last week that I was there. And I got to know him a little bit, and he was all about it. He was into AA, so he was going to go to the optional AA meeting. Oh, I get chills when I say that. So I thought he was cool, and if he thought AA was cool, I was like, well, I'll give it a shot. And so it was just him and I. Everybody else in the house just wasn't going to go to the AA meeting still. But I thought, I'm leaving rehab in a couple of days. Like, why don't I check out this Alcoholics Anonymous thing, right? So I go with him, we go into the meeting, and as we're walking through the door of the AA meeting, I say to myself in my head, they're not going to make me say I'm an alcoholic. I'm not an alcoholic. They're not going to make me say it. Because I had a feeling that the AAers, the Alcoholics Anonymous group, or tribe, or cult, right, was going to make me say that I'm an alcoholic. And I didn't believe that I was. I thought that was a bad word. I wasn't interested in any of that. And so I kind of like have that intention as I walk in that I'm not going to say it. They're not going to make me say I'm an alcoholic. And so we go in, we sit down, and it's super crowded. There was probably about like 200 people there, and people were like crouched in. Most people are like sitting on the floor. There was couches. I mean, it's a sober living home, so it was like a big living room space that outlooked onto like the ocean there in Malibu. And so he and I sat in the front on a couch, and they asked if it was anybody's first meeting. I raised my hand, and I went up, and they gave me a keychain that had the Serenity Prayer on it, and I sat back down. So now they all know it's my first meeting ever. And then they are like, okay, now we're going to go around the room and introduce ourselves. And so the gist was you're supposed to say like, hi, I'm Frank, I'm an alcoholic. And then everyone goes, hi, Frank. And then the next person goes, hey, I'm Sarah, I'm an alcoholic. And everyone says, hi, Sarah, right? Like we know that from the movies. We don't have to go to an AA meeting to know that that's kind of the deal. That's what happens. So they're like, we'll start with you. And the person up front points to me to start the introductions. And I was so scared. I started having like an anxiety attack. I was like, I didn't want the pressure of 200 people looking at me, right? I was so uncomfortable in my skin. I was so awkward. I'm coming off benzos, like I've just done like a 10-day fast taper off benzos. I'm like 3 days off benzos. I'm like, 3.5, 4 weeks off alcohol. Did not want the pressure on me. It was too much. Plus I had a phobia of public speaking, believe it or not. And so I certainly wouldn't have made videos back then in 2009 or had the confidence or courage anyway, so I say, hey, I'm Kirsten. And everybody keeps staring at me. And I know what I know what they want me to say. Alcoholics Anonymous is trying to pressure me into calling myself an alcoholic. I understand what's happening. And I'm not interested in being manipulated. I wasn't interested in being bullied into saying something that's not true, that I didn't agree with. Like, fuck that shit. So yeah, they keep staring at me. The pressure's building up. The hip hop guy that I think is super cool is next to me. He's elbowing me. He's saying alcoholic, alcoholic. I know they want me to say that. He's guiding me to say it. And I didn't want to say it. Like, don't bully me. And so after like, I don't know, it might've been 30 seconds. It seemed like it was eternity because I was so uncomfortable in my skin and everybody staring at me. I felt like I was going to pass out. Like it was overwhelming. It's pretty messed up looking back on it, like the level of manipulation that went into this. And I know that they were trying to help me and do what they felt was the right thing, but it's a little messed up at the same time. You know, I guess I could have two minds about this and see it from the perspective of somebody, my perspective in that moment, and then the perspective of them, that they think they think they're saving my life or something, right? Like I get it. Anyway, it's definitely manipulative. And I finally say it, and I betrayed myself. The pressure was so great in the room that I betrayed myself. And I said, I'm Kirsten, and I probably said it all like funky, you know, like I'm an alcoholic. You know how it's like hard to say it, or you hear people say it for the first time and it like comes out weird. And then everybody clapped and said, hi, Kirsten. And then like the tribe accepted me, which felt good, but like it didn't feel good to betray myself. I felt really irritated about that. And then, you know, the meeting went on. There was a speaker there. He was sharing some horrific stuff. Like I didn't relate at all. He went through some extreme child abuse that I hadn't. He went through some like gnarly stuff. I still totally remember his story, but I related to a lot of like how he felt. And so I didn't know the protocol. I didn't know the traditions. I didn't know how you're supposed to be an Alcoholic Anonymous or whatever, but I felt inspired to thank him. I didn't know that that's a principle that does get taught to people who go to AA, thank the speaker, right? And so I just felt inspired to thank him because like he sparked something in me. Like I felt it. I felt his story, and like he was, you know, had decades up sober at that point. And so I went up to him, I waited in line and I thanked him. And he obviously knew it was my first meeting, and he was there for that long awkward where I was bullied into saying alcoholic, right? He was there for that. He probably thought I was so brave. You know, from his perspective, right, for saying it, I felt bullied. So then I just thanked him for a share, and he gave me his number, he gave me a hug, and he probably said something like, keep coming back, call anytime. And that was that. And so I left with Mr. Hip Hop Dude. We got back in our druggy buggy, like the van that goes to the rehab, but it was just us because nobody else at the non-12-step rehab wanted to go. And there was something about that speaker's story that inspired me to go to one more meeting. So I got out of rehab like 2 days later, and like then I was faced with, am I going to go to another meeting or not? Right? And I did. Spoiler alert, I did. I went to another meeting because I really related to how he felt, and like I was scared. I was scared that I was going to drink. I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, like 0%. I didn't want to call myself an alcoholic, 0%, right? Not interested. But I didn't want to die. You know, I didn't want to get drunk again. Rehab was expensive. And so I felt like I was fucked. You know, I was fucked. Like I was out of options. I didn't know what to do. And so, so yeah, I ended up going to a meeting the night I got out of rehab too. And maybe I'll make that story my second AA meeting in another video. So I realize I may have offended you in this because if you're in AA, you might be offended at the way I described this. If you're not in AA, you might be offended that I mentioned AA. Welcome to being offended. This is a part of life when you're sober, right? Like you have all your feelings. But that's it. That's just the raw, real truth of like what my first meeting was like. People were really welcoming, but I also felt really bullied, and I didn't like that. I felt upset when I went home that like I was coerced into saying I was an alcoholic. So there you have it, folks. My first ever Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Share what you like in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.